Hey, welcome to the theory of positivity. This is an objective theory, not a subjective philosophy. This is about how reality is actually structured, how reality actually works, provable with simple, verifiable physics. You can understand this. There is no math whatsoever, and it will be big fun as soon as we get through this short introduction. Okay, this is the reality we are taught, the reality us civilized folks have been bred to assume and perceive for a very long time. Right, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This is still the foundation of all the Holy Roman physics we are taught in university, and it is in fact the foundation of our entire culture, unbeknownst to ourselves. Every action, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction? No, that is not accurate. For some actions, there are equal and opposite reactions. For other actions, there are greater and reciprocal reactions, even in physics. All hail Joseph Newman. And for other types of actions, there are other types of reactions. All relationships are not opposites, only some of them. Some relationships are complements, even in physics. Everything is not contradiction. Some of reality is harmony, even in physics. I got a little COPD. I got to catch my breath now and then. So born out of this action versus opposite reaction, predator versus prey, addiction versus withdrawal, ideology, came its cousin. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. Seeing the entire universe as trillions of tiny spinning balls banging into each other, like balls on a pool table called atoms. If one ball gains velocity, the one that hit it loses velocity. This is very true. If you mix hot and cold water together, the hot gets colder, the cold gets hotter until they equal out. Also very true. We have Ohm's law. If you raise the voltage, the current goes lower, or if you raise the current, the voltage goes lower, etc., etc. Very true. Where am I? All the laws of thermodynamics and so on and so forth. All referring to interactions between kinetic activities. Billiard balls banging into each other on a pool table. One goes faster, the other goes slower, and of course this is accurate. However, all kinetic activities have at their base simple inertia. Right, you know what inertia is? That's the thing that throws you in the back of your car if you take off too fast. All of these laws are simply observations of inertia over here, interacting in some way with inertia over there, as it were. And those laws are all very correct insofar as they only refer to inertial relationships, to inertial activities. But there is much more to our physical universe than just inertia. There is this related thing called gravity. Gravity is inertia's wife and lover, and who, under very specific conditions, which I'll talk about in these videos, gravity combines with inertia to create energy. I will prove this very simply with the examples on this video. This universe creates kinetic energy very slowly but relentlessly out of the creative co-opposition of gravity and inertia and or their various relatives. voltage, currents, reactance, and so on. So that's what these first few videos are about. Positive is greater than negative. Damn big fun. And here we go. So first of all, don't be intimidated by this. It's all very simple. I'm using this first example just to pique the interest of folks who already know something about physics and or electricity. Electricity is the original physics. It's also not necessary to remember everything I say. As long as you understand what I'm saying as we go along, it will all become very clear in a few minutes. So these, 1, 2, 3, represent 3 superconducting generators. Electric generators that are made with superconducting wire and superconducting magnets. These handles turn in circles, rotating the magnets inside the generators, which move past the wires, producing electricity. These rockets are rigidly attached to these handles so that they will turn in circles as they push on the handles. All 3 rockets are identical in every way. You just can't see the top of that one. Now this is called a thought experiment. It's okay. Einstein did them a whole lot. Don't have to be embarrassed. So superconducting wires have no internal friction. They don't heat up when huge amounts of electricity pass through them. I'm using superconducting examples because our universe creates kinetic energy in the frictionless void of space. There is no friction in empty space. That's where energy is created. I should explain. Air has lots of friction. If a rocket flies too fast through the air, it will burn up. But if you shrink down to the size of one air molecule, that one molecule is spinning in empty space. There is no friction acting upon the individual air molecules because the space between each one of them is empty. Besides New Age energy stuff. Unless something big is moving through the air, rubbing on the molecule as it passes, etc., etc. So this is the same with the atoms comprising those molecules. Vortexes spinning in a void of empty space. Atoms, molecules, planets, stars, solar systems, galaxies, etc. all spin in a frictionless void. There may be lots of friction within those spinning vortexes, but each one as a single individual thing, a point of reference, is alone in space with no friction acting upon it. Even a galaxy is like one huge frisbee held together by gravity spinning away in space. Now very specific interactions between the gravity and the inertia among those spinning bodies create kinetic energy. So these superconducting generators are conceptual aids in understanding how this natural process happens. So this represents a side view of any one of the generators. Hope you can see this. This red line here is superconducting wire. This is a central shaft attached to all the magnets and also attached to this handle. These vertical lines all represent superconducting magnets, which all move in a circle past the wires as the handle is turned by the rocket. Now if you were to look into this generator from this end, you would see something like this. This is a close-up view of the end magnet surrounded by all the wires. This is the end of the central shaft that goes straight back into the generator, attaching to all the magnets and to the handle at the other end of this thing. The red line in the previous drawing only showed one set of wires, but there would actually be several sets surrounding the magnets. The wires would be organized so as to always have correct polarity as the magnet moves in circles. Very simple. Question: why can't you just walk up to a big generator, give it a good spin, and light up a whole city? Because the more amps a generator puts out, the harder it becomes to turn the generator. Inside a generator are magnets that move past wires. When those magnets move past those wires, the wires push out electricity. They push out amps along the wire itself. But anytime amps move along a wire, the wire becomes magnetic. And the magnetism of the wire pushes back against the magnets which are moving past it. So the more amps a generator pushes out, the harder it becomes to turn. And of course, the less amps it pushes out, the easier it becomes to turn. More amps going through the wires, harder to turn. Less amps, easier to turn. So question: what determines how many amps go through the wire? Whatever the generator is feeding, whatever it's giving its electricity to, that will determine how many amps go through the wires. So this is a little tricky, but it's not as bad as it looks. All these rectangles represent brand new huge truck batteries that need to be charged. They're completely discharged. Now they're arranged differently in each example. The way these batteries are arranged, as they are being charged by the generators, will determine how many amps flow through the wires, and this will determine how hard it will be to turn the handles. All batteries push back against the amps that are being pushed through them while they're being charged. Something like pushing air into a tire. It takes energy to do it. But unlike mechanical things, if you arrange the batteries in this manner, the top, the pushback that the generator feels will become less as more and more batteries are added. Why this happens is for another video. It's just basic electricity. This is nothing new. The purple lines, I hope you can see that. These lines are purple. These represent the wires. And those wires go through and then out of the generator, pushing amps through all these batteries. Now in this arrangement here, there is almost no force at all pushing back against the amps that are coming from the generator, and so a huge amount of amps will flow as soon as this handle begins turning. Because there are so many amps flowing through these wires, the handle is very hard to turn, so it will turn very slowly. Now in this arrangement here, the pushback of all the batteries will add up. The more batteries you put on, the more it is harder to get through here. It's like, they're adding up. The more you put, the harder it is. You can see the difference. I shouldn't ad lib, should I? In this arrangement, the pushback of all the batteries will add up as more batteries are added. You can see the difference. The amps have to go through each battery one after another in this arrangement, whereas at the top, the amps go through all the batteries at once. Right down here, the pushback adds up. Up here, the pushback decreases. It's like you can kind of imagine it coming out, going through these wires and whoosh, whoosh, going this way. But on this side, it's hard, it's difficult, it's difficult, it's difficult. So on this bottom example, only 1 amp will flow through the wires, and the handle will be very easy to turn, so it will turn very quickly. And then this arrangement in the middle combines the top and the bottom, so this handle will turn harder than the bottom but easier than the top. So all 3 of these generators are being powered by 3 identical rockets which burn the same amount of fuel at the same rate, producing the same amount of force for the same amount of time. We'll say 1 minute. This top generator handle moves very slowly, only 1 rotation per minute, because it's being pushed back by all the amps. It takes an entire minute for the handle to turn around just 1 time, because the huge amount of amps are pushing back against the handle, which of course is pushing against the force of the rocket. The middle generator handle moves more quickly than the top, but slower than the bottom, because the amps are less than the top, but more than the bottom. This bottom generator handle moves very quickly. We're going to say 10,000 RPM, because there's only 1 amp flowing through these wires. During the 1 minute these generators operate, the handle rotates 10,000 times because there's only 1 amp. But all 3 generators produce exactly the same amount of power during the 1 minute that they operate. How the hell does that work? So all generators push out amps. Those amps are pushed out by a force inside the generator that comes from the magnets. That force is called volts. Voltage, or volts, is the amount of electrical force that the magnets inside the generator create when they move past the wires. The slower those magnets move, the lower is the voltage. The faster those magnets move, the higher is the voltage. The total power that a generator puts out is the volts multiplied by the amps. Voltage times amperage equals wattage. Volts times amps equals watts. Watts is the total power coming from the generator. So this top generator only produces 1 volt because the handle's rotating so slow, pushing out those 10,000 amps for 1 minute. This equals 10,000 watts, which is the total power coming from the generator for that minute. Now this middle generator produces 100 volts because the handle rotates faster, pushing 100 amps for 1 minute. 100 times 100 equals 10,000. This thing still puts out 10,000 watts, which is the total power coming from the generator for that 1 minute. This bottom generator produces 10,000 volts because the handle rotates so fast, because this thing is only pushing out 1 amp for 1 minute. Still it equals 10,000 watts, which is the total power coming from that generator for that minute. So all 3 generators are powered by 3 identical rockets and therefore produce 3 identical amounts of power. So this is just basic electricity, nothing new, nothing I'm inventing here. But here's the important part about all this, which I am inventing. The velocity of each rocket was different, and the total distance traveled by each rocket was different, even though each produced the same amount of power. The top rocket moved very slowly, only traveling 1 yard in 1 minute. The bottom rocket moved very quickly, traveling 10,000 yards in 1 minute. The velocity and the distance traveled by the rockets were not determining factors in producing the total output power of the generators. Only the force exerted by the rockets and the time those rockets exerted that force were determining factors. Keep in mind that electricity always travels at the speed of light, as it were, no matter how slow or fast the magnet is moving past the wire. 1 amp or 10,000 amps, those amps always move at the speed of light. Now regarding the rockets, the velocity and distance were not relevant. Only force and time were relevant. That is the point of this example. Why? Because that's what energy is. Energy simply is force plus time, regardless of where or how that force originated. And why is this important? To prove that positive is greater than negative by proving that this universe creates energy very slowly but relentlessly forever. You will see. So here are two of our superconducting generators, looking at them from the back obviously, or from the front. We will assume they are both feeding thousands of brand new huge truck batteries as the top arrangement did. But this time they are producing 10,000 amps and only 1/10 of a volt, rotating at 1/10 of one rotation per minute. This is not practical at all. This is simply to demonstrate a point. But keep in mind this would be possible, physically possible, if millions of dollars were spent building these things. So the top generator handle has a 15-pound bowling ball attached to it. The bottom has a rocket producing exactly 15 pounds of force attached to it. The dotted line represents the starting point of the handle. Now we won't run the handle in circles, we'll only move it from the top starting point to the bottom. Same thing on both of these. Then lift the handle back up and repeat the process. We will assume the handle operates on a pin ratchet. So this is what a pin ratchet might look like. Spin it this way and it just spins and doesn't move the drive shaft. There's a little pin. But spin it this way and the pin catches immediately and does spin the drive shaft. Now I don't know if these really exist. Maybe I should get a patent on that. So we lift the bowling ball to the top and let it go, and the handle very slowly descends. So slow that you can't even see it moving. It takes 2.5 minutes for the ball to descend from here to the lowest point. How much total energy has the generator produced? Same as this rocket, burning all that fuel for 2.5 minutes. The velocity of the descending ball was not a factor in determining how much energy was produced. The distance traveled by the ball was not a factor in determining how much total energy was produced. Only the force of the ball and the amount of time the ball exerted that force were relevant. Question: was the total amount of energy produced by the generator during that 2.5 minutes more than the minimum amount of energy needed to lift the ball back up to the starting point? Was the total, amount of energy produced by the generator during that 2.5 minutes more than the minimum amount of energy needed to lift the ball back up to the starting point? So we can decide that the distance from the top of the dotted line where the ball begins to the bottom where it ends is 2 feet. So the ball will need to be lifted 2 feet to start the cycle all over again. So imagine yourself holding a 15-pound bowling ball in front of you, about chest level, and slowly letting it down 2 feet over 2.5 minutes. Is your arm tired? Of course it is. That is how much energy the generator produced during the 2.5 minutes. Now the same ball, and you lift it up 2 feet using the least effort possible. That's how much energy is needed to operate the generator each cycle. Which takes more energy, to slowly let the ball down for 2.5 minutes or to quickly lift it up? The total energy that the generator will produce as the ball slowly descends will be much more than the minimum energy needed to lift it back up to its starting point. In this case, the velocity of the ball and the distance it traveled were not relevant factors, only the 15-pound force and the 2.5 minutes time. So this, I hope, is now self-explanatory. Force equals force. Force plus time equals force plus time. What is energy? Energy is simply force plus time, regardless of how that force was produced or where. Gravity in and of itself is energy. Magnetism in and of itself is energy. I don't know if you can see the bottom. Voltage in and of itself is energy. And the strong force, weak force, any universal, eternal, self-sustaining force is energy in and of itself. So here is another gravity-powered superconducting generator. Again, not practical at all, but physically possible. Possible is all that matters now. Practical will come later. Practical is a little more complex. So this is a small variation on the gravity-powered generator we just looked at. In this design, the super powerful superconducting magnet free falls through the center of the superconducting wires, which feed thousands of superconducting electric motors, batteries, and so on, all designed and arranged for maximum amps and minimum volts. So this is a cross-section. These are the wires seen from the front, not the sides. And we can assume there are means to hold these wires in place and to keep this in place as it slowly floats through all this energy. As soon as the magnet is released, it tries to fall, but millions of amps start flowing along the wires closest to it as soon as it begins moving, and this pushes back on the magnet, suspending it in midair. The energy this generator produces is equivalent to the force of the magnet. We'll say it weighs 1,000 pounds, plus the time it descends. We could also imagine several hundred magnets, one behind the other, all connected by 1 or 2 aluminum shafts running along the top. This generator could be a half mile long and 500 feet high. It's imaginary, but physically possible. So this is a top view of the same generator. You're just looking down. This was that front magnet we saw. This is the front of one of the wires, and then the rest are below this. This is 500 feet above the ground, we'll say. All these magnets are held together by aluminum rod, maybe that goes along here and another one along here. This whole thing slowly floats downward as it produces millions and millions of amps that go out to the city and light up everything. Powered by gravity. Again, the total energy produced by the generator as the magnets very slowly descend will be much greater than the minimum energy needed to lift the magnets back up, assuming the magnets fall, these ones fall very, very slowly and are lifted back up with the least effort possible. And probably a hydraulic pump would be the most efficient way to lift up one set of magnets during the same time the others are falling through the generator, free falling through all that energy. So this demonstrates the basic idea. On the left, this big rocket is burning almost enough fuel and producing almost enough force to keep this magnet suspended in midair, but the magnet is actually descending very, very slowly. Now that's the same amount of energy that the generator produces as the magnet very slowly descends. On the right, this little rocket, I hope you can see that, much smaller, which uses the minimum amount of energy needed to to lift the magnet back up to its starting point. This side, the weight is being opposed only by the pure energy of the amps, moving at the speed of light, as it were, through the wires, as it were, producing a magnetic force which opposes the downward motion of the magnets. This side, the weight is opposed mostly by this rod, and also this rocket, which lifts it up the same way you might lift a car jack. So here is a variation of that, where the small rocket goes in a big circle. It rotates this gear jack using a rack and pinion arrangement which lifts the weight up using the least fuel possible. Again, this pole is actually holding most of the weight. The gear teeth transfer the weight from this rack through this pinion to this pole, which is attached to the floor. The longer it takes this generator magnet to fall, the longer we could make this lever, and the smaller we could make this rocket. And that would be the difference between how much energy is being created during the time this thing falls. But just remember, a smaller rocket for a longer period of time is the same as a larger rocket for a shorter period of time. There will always be a minimum amount of energy needed to lift this up, no matter how cleverly we arrange gears, levers, and so forth. However, that much energy will still be less than the energy produced by the generator. We get this much out of the generator, but only put this much into it. And the most practical way to do that is a hydraulic pump, if I'm not mistaken. That represents a hydraulic pump. This thing goes up. During the same amount of time this thing is falling, then it would roll over on some casters and the whole thing would begin again. Big circle. Okay, and this again is just a conceptual aid, not a practical invention. Energy simply is force plus time, regardless of where or how that force originates, and this simulates one way the universe creates energy. Now next is a completely different approach. This is also very impractical and impossible to actually build here on Earth, but it is physically possible. There are magnetic and electrical allegories. Which I will explain in a later video. This is first necessary because of its simplicity, which can be expanded later. Okay, so here we are out in space, very far removed from any other planet, stars, or any other physical things. We're alone in space, a bunch of damn hippies. These represent identical solid steel spheres, we'll say 50 million tons apiece. Well, that's how much they weigh on Earth. These here are two identical steel columns holding the spheres apart. Everything is perfectly engineered and equal distance from the center. This is called the thought experiment also, right? Einstein did these all the time. It's okay. You don't have to be embarrassed. So the gravity of these spheres is pulling them together, but the columns are holding them apart. The columns are under pressure, but not so much pressure that they warp. Okay, this area here would heat up slightly compared to the rest of the device, but not enough to warp, at least for several millions of years. Now here, directly in the center, there is no gravity. An object placed here would not be pulled in any particular direction. It would simply be floating in space, feeling no gravity at all. There is no gravity in the center of the Earth, for instance, or in the center of a sun, or any star, or anything that is round. If you were somehow placed in a plastic bubble in the center of the earth, your head wouldn't be pulled up in this direction while your feet are being pulled down and your two arms are being pulled in those directions. That's not how gravity works. You would simply be floating, no gravity at all. And again, this is already known, nothing new. It's a fact. Now, in the center of a star, there is no gravity, but there is maximum pressure. Pressure from all sides causing maximum heat. Whereas on the surface of the star, there is maximum gravity, but no pressure, causing no heat at all. That dichotomy between the center of the center and the surface produces all kinds of electrochemical phenomena and so on. Imagine this is a drop the size of the earth. There would be a drop of water the size of the earth. There would be so much pressure toward the center of that drop that it would cause so much heat that steam would develop somewhere near the center. Then molecules would split apart closer to the center, and then atoms would split closest to the center. And all of this would be pushing superheated content up toward the surface, which would spit out above the surface, cool down, return to the surface, and so on, looking very similar to the kinds of ejections seen around the sun. And this would go on forever. And the only energy lost would be whatever shoots out into space and does not return. If nothing shoots out into space, then this would be an eternal process. That would be determined by the size of the drop, being just large enough to cause steam and maybe molecular interactions between the center and the surface, but not so large as to cause superheated energy to eject beyond the gravity of the drop itself. This is very oversimplified. Okay, back to our two steel spheres. So here's one view of this, and if we took it and turned it sideways, like that, we would end up seeing that. The other column is still there, but you can't see it because it's on the other side of this one. And then, yeah, why not? The next thing we're going to do is that's the exact same device, but I simply not included the columns. They're still there, but I haven't drawn them in because we're going to see other things that need to be seen in the center of this. So, these are our two steel spheres. This represents a pipe full of liquid. Don't ask me how it got out there. And it's exactly dead center between the two spheres and also between the two columns. And if you ran some liquid through this pipe, that liquid would not feel any gravity. It would never feel itself being pulled this way or this way. And it wouldn't know these things are here, gravitationally speaking. Again, this is nothing new. This is a fact. This is well known in science. So there's that. All right, so this thing represents a frictionless pipe surrounding the sphere. Again, the same device. Everything's perfect. This is exactly in the center, etc., etc. This pipe is 10 feet in diameter. A frictionless pipe, it might be lined with Teflon or whatever we could do. And it's filled with a frictionless liquid. Those liquids do exist. You can buy some online. Again, our created energy will be circulating in a frictionless environment, as does the created energy in frictionless space. So this bottom part actually runs right along the bottom of the sphere. I just drew it out here for clarity. Okay, this is 1,000 feet. This top is 1,000 feet above the surface. And we can assume these spheres are like 1,001 feet apart. This is just for clarity, putting space between everything, so you can see what I'm doing. So this liquid will flow in circles forever, several million years anyway. The gravity at this end is maximum, pulling all the liquid in the 10-foot diameter pipe down 1,000 feet. There's no gravity here, so there's nothing stopping the liquid from this end from moving straight up the 1,000 feet. So the liquid falling here will push the rest of the liquid in circles, and it will increase in velocity forever, or until the thing finally begins to heat up and rattle apart because of vibration and so on. And we'd have to do something to stop it from going so fast, so we put a little generator right here and a little generator right here maybe to keep it going at the right speed. So the liquid falling here will push the rest of the liquid in circles. Oh, I just said that. If the gravity at the top is, say, 5 feet per second, then the liquid will increase in velocity about 5 feet per second forever. Now, right about here, there would be some opposition. And this is for all you physicists that already knew this, but I'm going to explain that too. Where the gravity begins to suddenly drop off, the liquid would actually be pulled in the opposite direction. Like if you set a bowling ball here, it would just be weightless, right in this area. But right in this area, somewhere in there, if you set it on the surface, it would actually roll back this way a little bit toward the gravity. Right at the place where the gravity is going from something suddenly to nothing. Just this one little area though. But it would also do the same thing on this side. And so the opposition here would be neutralized by the cooperation over here. This pushing this way plus this pushing this way will be greater force than this trying to not go this way. The two together will be much greater than this one by itself. And incidentally, this extra distance from the surface would be irrelevant. This would be pushing in this direction with over 99.9% of the force that this is pushing this way. Keep in mind that a 150-pound man weighs 149.92 pounds, 10,000 feet above sea level. So this distance of only 1,000 feet would only diminish the balancing effect by maybe 1/10 of 1%. This plus this would be much greater than this. Okie dokie. And here's the same thing, but since we have two spheres, we might as well use both of them to fullest advantage. We have 1,000-foot drop here at maximum gravity, 1,000-foot drop here at maximum gravity, no gravity here, getting help this way, which is balancing the little bit of push this way. So you can see this is like a figure eight or an eternity thing. That liquid would just keep moving forever. And you could put a generator there and there to slow down the movement of the water or the liquid, the frictionless liquid. So this is kind of the top view of the same thing. This is the pipe coming up from this side up here and back down and down underneath and coming back and coming up around this way and then back down. Same thing, just a different viewpoint. I can just do this. And now, this is just the maximum efficiency of the same idea. These two things are as close as they can be now. This line is straight up. This pipe, there'd actually be one on top of the other. Remember what we said. Anything right through the center here, perfectly dead center, would not feel any gravity. So this is the maximum distance of falling. It's just more efficient. And this may be up higher, so it might lose, like 1 entire percent, but you're going to gain so much more from this being, say, 5,000 feet of falling straight down, 10-foot pipe full of liquid. You got your figure 8 circle of energy. And there's the same thing again, but maximizing our efficiency. We have 2 of these next to each other, one on top of the other. They're not really interfering. This one here is right along the ground, and then this one here is, say, 5,000 feet up. And again, so you got all that extra energy being circulated. And then we're going to take that same idea, only we're going to put, 1, 2, 3, 4 of these. We'll have smaller columns separating these. This is looking straight down now. And this would be maximum efficiency. Each one would lose a little bit because the pipes right in the center wouldn't be exactly centered. So each one might lose, 1% versus if it was alone, but the whole thing would be much more efficient, creating all kinds of extra energy and creating energy. And when I say creating energy, I mean creating velocity. The velocity would continue forever and being created by in this case, it's actually being created by gravity and pressure. I'm not sure how natural this is. Well, I can't say. Some things I can't talk about. So that's what that is. Oh, you don't need to see that. So hopefully these superconducting examples so far have given you a good idea of what I'm going for in these first few videos. Positive is greater than negative. Positive does not equal negative. But beyond this, however, not only is positive greater than negative, but positivity accumulates over time as negativity remains more or less constant. That's how reality works. This may not be your life, it certainly hasn't been mine, but overall, objectively, scientifically, inevitably, this is how evolution works, this is how nature works, this is how reality is structured, this is in fact how physics works. So the physics equivalent of that is energy accumulates over time as gravity and inertia remain more or less constant. Actually, there's a lag, a time lag behind that. And gravity and inertia together create energy. So this basically is a theory these first few videos claim to prove. Keep in mind that on an electrical level, voltage is akin to atomic gravity, amperage is akin to atomic inertia, gravity and inertia, voltage and amperage, same fundamental relationships between the same fundamental properties. Right, our gravity-powered superconducting generators created energy which accumulated over time, even as the gravity of Earth and the inertia of the amps remained constant. Now that's oversimplified. However, all complexities in physics always reduce to the relationship between gravity and inertia. Okay, this universe creates kinetic energy out of the co-opposition of gravity and inertia under very specific circumstances. So what the hell is co-opposition? So there are 3 fundamental relationships: cooperation, opposition, and co-opposition. Right, we all know the first 2. Cooperation, you could imagine 2 hands working together to tie a complex sailor's knot. That's cooperation. Opposition, you could imagine 2 fists colliding or two rams butting heads and so on. We all know what opposition is. Now, co-opposition is a combination of the two, cooperating and opposing simultaneously. Co-opposition should be as obvious and universally recognized as the other two. Why has this been hidden from us peasants? Co-opposition is the universal creative relationship. The most obvious example of co-opposition is sex. Mom and dad co-oppose each other under very specific circumstances to make a baby. Co-opposition. Jazz musicians often co-oppose their instruments while they improvise, cooperating and opposing simultaneously. Time and space, physical and spiritual, macro and micro, oxygen and hydrogen, inertia and gravity, male and female, and on and on. All of these creative partners co-oppose each other under very specific circumstances to create the reality we all perceive, and vice versa. So a term I will use to refer to co-opposition which creates, including all the various specifics necessary for that creation, is simply creative co-opposition. Co-opposition is the primary creative relationship of our universe. Yes, it is. So how do gravity and inertia co-oppose each other? How? And how does this co-opposition create energy? How does it do it? So this represents a perfect flywheel. The best flywheel money can buy. Perfect bearings, the entire wheel perfectly balanced in all directions, and so on. Absolute precision, as precise and perfect as modern technology can produce. It is 10 foot in diameter. The outside, this outside here, is a donut-shaped lead ring, 6 inches in diameter. The rest of the wheel, the inside part, say is 1/4 inch cast aluminum. This is the axle spinning in a perfect raceway, etc. Everything, every component is absolutely perfect, as absolutely balanced as money can buy. Now, if you try and spin this thing, it will oppose your effort. You will need to expend energy to get it spinning. Now, a small portion of that opposition will be friction, vibration, and so on. Right, the friction of the bearings against the axle. But most of the opposition will be due to the inertia of the wheel, particularly the inertia of the outer lead ring. If this is so perfectly built that the ratio of inertia to friction is, say, 99:1, then we can use this perfect flywheel to actually create energy. Yes, we can. Therefore, we will imagine exactly that. The ratio of friction to inertia is 99:1. This is a superconducting flywheel, as it were. Again, not practical, very expensive to fabricate, but absolutely possible in the physical realm here on Earth. That's all that matters now. So if we give this wheel a good spin and then let it go, it will continue to spin for a very long time, but will eventually slow down because of the friction, etc. Now, if it is spinning very slowly in this direction, and we place a 1 ounce weight here, the weight will cooperate with the flywheel in that it will help the flywheel to spin faster. However, this weight will not descend as quickly attached to the flywheel as it would have fallen if we had just dropped it from the same height, because it is being opposed by the inertia of this flywheel. This is co-opposition. The inertia and the weight oppose each other. The weight is trying to drop faster, but the inertia of the flywheel opposes that, and the flywheel is trying to stay at the same velocity, actually trying to slow down slightly because of the friction, but the weight opposes that. Simultaneously, the weight is actually pushing the flywheel faster in the direction it was already moving. Cooperating and opposing simultaneously, co-opposition, kind of like politics. So this is basically the same as our gravity-powered superconducting generator, in that the slowly descending weight is being opposed for a long period of time by the inertia of the device. In this wheel, the inertia comes from the rotating lead ring. In our superconducting generator, the inertia comes from the flowing amps. I call that inertiance. That's another video. At its core, the opposition of the amps fundamentally is inertia. The work required to push amps along a wire is the work of dealing with the inertia associated with those amps. Inertiance. Our generator co-opposed gravity and inertia in the form of weight and amperage. Same properties, same relationship. This wheel will do the same thing in a more direct manner. So this is the same wheel, but the base has not been drawn in. Assume it is there. This axle extends out from the base. This represents a single lightweight rod with equal weights attached to both ends, and this opening in the center which interacts with this axle. The axle is rigidly attached to the wheel. I'll call this a weight line. And just for clarification, here's the weight line again all by itself. Like this is just a hollow hole. This is solid, and two weights on either end. This is kind of a side view from here. You could stick your hand right through this hole. And these corners would actually be rounded. I just didn't draw that in. You'll see that in a minute. Just for clarification. So the weight line is attached to the wheel and axle, but not rigidly. And we will use the least amount of weight necessary to power this device. You'll see that in a minute. Notice that the weight is off-centered, so that it will push the flywheel it is attached to if the flywheel is given a slight push to get it going. Yes, this probably seems like a variation of Da Vinci's imbalanced wheel, but this one actually works. Da Vinci could not have imagined a perfect flywheel, so he did not think to separate the weight from the inertia. His hammers combined both, while the wheel itself was simply there to hold the hammers in place. This operates by co-opposing a small amount of weight with a large amount of inertia over a long period of time in a frictionless environment, just as nature does. It's not really anything like Da Vinci. So we give this a slight push, and it begins to rotate. It slowly increases in velocity because of the imbalanced weight. So here it continues to rotate and increasing in velocity in this direction. Notice the weight is longer on this side, so it's going to keep pushing it in that direction. Finally, it has rotated a half circle, and the weight is resting at its lowest point. If we left this as it is, it will continue to rotate and eventually stop almost to the top. but not quite as high as where it started from. And then it would begin rotating the other way, very slowly. And back and forth it would go, hour after hour, like a very slow pendulum. Very slowly until it would finally rest at this point. But it is not left as it is. When this weight reaches its lowest point, it detaches from the wheel and at the same time attaches to an arm which is attached to the floor just out front of the axle. Lovely artwork. So this is just a side view of the same thing. This just represents the arm. It's sitting on the floor and that also interacts with this. This is a side view of the weight line. When it moves down, it falls into place. This arm holds it up for while other things happen. The arm simply dangles the weight line in place as the wheel continues to rotate. The wheel will continue to rotate because of the inertia of the lead ring. The axle also continues to rotate because it is rigidly attached to the wheel. So the rotating axle will grab this part and lift this straight up from the center. And when it gets up all the way, the cycle will begin again. Right, that's after it's been lifted all the way back up, and then the cycle begins again. So just for clarification, this is a close-up of the axle lifting the weight line back up as it rotates. So this is when the weight line is at its lowest point. This part is down at the lowest point. This part is, and you can see this is down there. It has just detached from the wheel and it is dangling from the arm which is attached to the floor. But as this rotates, the axle grabs the top of this and moves it in this direction. You can see this is going this way. It's pulling that this way. It catches again in this corner. Now this drawing is an exaggeration for clarity. There might only be a 32nd of an inch difference here. So after this rotating shaft has moved from here to here, or the rotating shaft has moved this thing from here to here, it'll continue to rotate and then through rack and pinion or whatever, be something super efficient. It continues to rotate and lifts this thing straight up. Right, because this is going around still because of the inertia of the perfect flywheel. When it gets to this point, it detaches from the arm, reattaches to the wheel, and the cycle begins again because now this weight is up at the top again. And this would all be designed so this all happened in 1/4 turn. You could design it that way very easily. So this is all an exaggeration for clarification. In 1/4 turn of the wheel, this all would take place. So keep in mind that the inertia of this lead ring is magnified many times here in the center of the wheel. If this thing is 10 foot in diameter, then this distance acts exactly as a 5-foot lever, magnifying the force of the entire lead ring, similar to a car jack magnifying the force of someone's arm. But it gains in force, it loses in distance, but that problem has been taken care of in this particular design, assuming we've reduced enough of the friction. And the details of how this weight line would detach and attach and reattach without using significant energy in the process. It involves rods sliding down away from and then up into rings attached to the wheel, and rods sliding down into and then away from rings attached to the arm coming from the floor, and so on. Those details are important and all very doable, but too complicated for me to draw. The main idea is that the weight is applied to the outside of the circle over a long period of time, increasing the energy of the moving flywheel, but then that energy is taken from the center of the wheel, and the total energy out is more than the total energy into the wheel. The total energy the wheel has gained from the weight line is more than the total energy used by the wheel to lift that weight line back up to its starting position. And there would be a sweet spot for all this, the right weights and all that stuff. It'd be a pretty big one though. This would be possible to build, but I think it would probably cost, I don't know, 50 grand or something. I'm not going to build it, and I'm not asking for any money. This has no value other than to prove this concept, but it is a very important concept to prove. And yeah, don't try and build this in your garage. It won't work because it has to be perfect. So here's a variation on that same idea. Same wheel, but this time it's co-opposed by a weight on the end of a shaft. The shaft is attached to the axle through a pin ratchet. Remember the pin ratchet where this thing could go up this way with no problem, but as soon as it comes this way, the pin will catch and it'll push the whole wheel. So the weight begins here and descends very slowly as the wheel turns. When it reaches this point, it rests on a platform attached to the floor, but the wheel continues to rotate because of its inertia. At this point, a cam on the drive shaft pushes this rod, which pushes a very wide membrane in this box, which applies pressure to some volatile gas inside the box. This is a box and this is a tube. The box in this tube is full of that gas. The gas heats up and begins expanding right after the membrane is completely pushed in. But this rod and membrane is ratcheted so that the gas cannot push back as it expands. All that pressure pushes up this tube, pushing on an accordion type end which has a weight inside the tip. The accordion end is also ratcheted in a way that it will not release until the pressure is built up to the appropriate level. When the pressure is at that point, the ratchet releases, boom, and the accordion explodes outward, pushing this weight suddenly back to its starting point. And once that pressure is released, the membrane and the accordion end will return to their original position and the cycle will start again. And the gas will cool off just as quickly after the pressure is released as it heated up when the pressure was applied. So keep in mind that the gas in your refrigerator, which cycles through hot and cold day in and day out, year after year, does not lose any energy in the process. The gas in this box would not lose or gain any energy in the process. It would simply heat and expand when under pressure, and then cool and contract when that pressure is released, exactly like the refrigerant gas in your refrigerator. The gas itself is not doing any work. It is simply reacting to the pressure applied by the axle. The axle itself, powered by the lead ring, which was powered by the weight, is doing the work, not the gas. But this weight is not what's pushing on here. This weight stops, and it is all the inertia amplified through this thing, which is pushing on this with great pressure, pushing against that membrane and putting pressure on all that volatile gas. Boom, knocks this thing up. Cycle starts all over again. I am not a chemist, but I know absolutely that the appropriate type of gas for this application could readily be discovered by someone who is a chemist. Now this could also be accomplished with a spring assembly, believe it or don't, being pressed down by a cam on the axle, then releasing suddenly to pop that weight back up to its starting position, assuming this wheel is perfect enough, assuming the ratio of inertia to friction is very, very high. And it would require a great deal of trial and error to discover the correct tension size, etc. of the spring or springs. And again, none of this is remotely possible for an amateur in a garage, so please do not spend your time and money trying to build one of these. The perfect flywheel alone would cost many thousands of dollars, possibly hundreds of thousands, I'm not sure. I can't find anyone who wants to build it or even give me a quote. And no, I'm not asking for money, only a like and share, please. And finally, this represents a magnetic powered version, which is very doable, although still very expensive, and which I plan to have built after I post this video if I can find anyone to build it. It also requires a well-made flywheel, but maybe not quite as perfect as the gravity-powered ideas would require. So this is the side view here. This top assembly, which contains the magnets, is the next page. I'll show that in a minute. What we're looking at here is another flywheel, but it's not flat. This one rotates parallel with the floor. This is a solid steel cone which attaches to this outer shell, which holds the lead donut around its outer edge, and would actually be much wider than this. I've just drawn it this way for convenience. Now this solid metal hardened steel cone is resting inside this cone-shaped hole cut into the top of this round metal bar, which is attached to the floor. Both cones, the insert and the receptacle, are hardened steel, perfectly machined, etc. The receptacle is slightly wider than the insert, so that the insert can rotate freely inside it. There's a small pool of WD-40 inside here. Again, this is not made to produce power, only to create enough energy with each cycle to prove the theory. The only point to building this is to prove that the device will in fact continue to rotate at an ever-increasing velocity with no input power other than the first push to get it going, to prove that this machine in fact creates energy. Now the odd shape of the flywheel is to prevent it from wobbling as it rotates. If it was simply a flat wheel, of course it would rotate and fall very quickly. So after many trials and errors, the most wobble-free design will be found and utilized. It is interesting to notice that this flying saucer shape turns out to be the most useful for this purpose. Now the exact shape, ratio, and so on will be discovered when it's actually built. It might also be stabilized with opposing magnets. Although they would add slightly to the friction, they would subtract from the inertia to friction ratio slightly. So ignoring this top portion for a moment, if you gave this thing a good spin, it will continue to spin for a very long time before finally coming to a stop because of friction, vibration, etc. So this is the top view of the magnetic drive assembly. So this magnet, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, but this is the most easy to understand. This magnet is very long and relatively weak, but it has a very long or a relatively long reach. As a rule, very strong magnets do not reach out as far as weak magnets. So this drive magnet is designed to have as long a reach as possible and as weak a force as possible. So these metal attractors are identical. They are solid steel. Notice that they come closer and closer to the center. This is how they attract this drive magnet, causing it to rotate in this direction. Also notice that the attractors have more mass at the far end and less mass at the close end. This will tend to even out the attraction from far end to near as much as possible. When the drive magnet has reached the closest location to the attractors, the machine will continue to rotate because of the inertia of the flywheel, the inertia of the lead donut along its outer edge. Now from this center, a cam will push these two rods. Those are rods, this is a cam. Don't worry about how I drew the cam. It would be made in the most efficient possible manner. This cam will push these two rods, which will push these attractors away from the drive magnet as the device continues to rotate. Notice the hinges here and here, which allow these ends to swing outward away from the magnet. Now we know that magnetism and power from the center of a circle both decrease by the square of the distance. Magnetic attraction decreases by the square of the distance from whatever it is moving away from, and the leverage of a lever decreases by the square of the distance from the fulcrum. In this case, the center cam is the fulcrum and the wheel is the lever. So we have like opposing like, with all the force of the lead donut magnified, pushing the thin piece of metal away from the magnet as the device continues to rotate. Now we can imagine 4 of these instead of 2. I just drew it this way for simplicity and clarity. So this thing, again, there's a sweet spot for all this in the design. It will increase in velocity as it approaches the end of here, the end of the attractors. Then it will slow down as it passes them because of the work it has to do to move them away, and then repeat that process, slowly increasing velocity after each pass. The larger the diameter of the flywheel, way out here, with a proportionately larger lead donut around its outer edge, the more energy this will create. Assuming, of course, the friction to inertia ratio remains very, very high as the size of the flywheel increases, which it would. Okay, to quickly sum up the basic idea of this video. This demonstrates that energy is simply force plus time, regardless of where or how that force originates. If this bowling ball takes 10 minutes to descend because it is being opposed only by inertia, then the inertia will gain energy equivalent to this rocket ship producing the same amount of force over the same amount of time. But the bowling ball does not burn fuel. It is driven by gravity, which is free and eternal. At the end of the 10 minutes, this superconducting inertia generator will have gained much more energy than the minimum needed to lift this back up to its starting point. Energy is force plus time. Energy equals force plus time. This planet Earth behaves exactly like a 6,000 trillion ton mass accelerating upwards at 32 feet per second forever in all directions simultaneously, burning no poisonous fuel whatsoever. That is a lot of energy, and there are already means to tap that energy in place, perfected already by Lockheed Martin in conjunction with other institutions. Those energy methods are being hidden for military reasons at great cost to our lovely planet and all us critters upon it. A plastic wheel which spins with great force simply as a result of its internal atomic structure could be produced by these institutions within a very short time if they were at all interested in doing this. I would not be surprised if one already exists somewhere. It would actually be two wheels that would spin with great force when they are very close together, and then when you pull them apart they would stop spinning. That's a whole nother video and I can't talk about that. So the basic method which nature uses to create energy, a force like gravity, magnetism, etc., which is free and eternal, is applied to the outside of the spinning circle for a relatively long period of time, causing the circle to spin even faster, and then the energy gained by that circle is taken or released immediately in the form of electricity, etc., from the center of the circle. All hail Joseph Newman. In space, the source of that force does not always move closer to the spinning circle because it is held in place by its surrounding. This is possibly how quasars work, but that's another video and I'm not sure. Most of the spinning things in the universe, from atomic vortexes to entire galaxies, spin in a frictionless void. It is in this frictionless void under very specific circumstances that gravity and inertia and their equivalent relatives such as voltage, current, reactance, and so on, they co-oppose each other to create energy. In the frictionless void of space, gravity and inertia together create energy pretty much the same way moms and dads create energy. Oh, create babies. Creative co-opposition. The idea that positive and negative are always in balance is incomplete because it does not refer to everything and every relationship. It only refers to some things and some relationships. Overall, objectively, positive is greater than negative. And in fact, positivity accumulates over time as negativity remains more or less constant. Now, if this is not obvious in your life, it is because positive and negative are so unevenly distributed among living beings on this planet, especially now when a small handful of very dubious individuals own, in quotes, over half this planet, while billions of others live in poverty and billions of critters and corporate slaughterhouses live in agony. This sacred, magnificent, and mysterious universe that we live in provides slowly increasing abundance, free of charge, forever. But us humans have been duped into a system where most of that extra, in quotes, that extra is funneled into the hands of a few ingenious criminal shysters. Ladies and gentlemen, billionaires tell fibs. How do you know when a billionaire is fibbing? He's moving his mouth. That's the end. Please like and share. Please like and share, please. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.